Listen, here's an idea that might challenge how you usually think about difficult relationships. You don't solve problems with a narcissistic person by confronting them aggressively, exposing them, or storming out in anger. Very often, strong emotional reactions, no matter how right they feel in the moment, end up feeding the exact pattern you're trying to break. Real change doesn't happen when you try to overpower someone. It happens when you step out of the emotional game they depend on. That quiet shift is often far more effective than loud confrontation. There's an important point here, and it's uncomfortable because it asks for self-control instead of a big dramatic move. Many people think strong emotions equal strength, but that isn't always true. A narcissistic person doesn't stay attached because of love, admiration, or even open conflict. They stay attached because your reactions, your anger, your long explanations, your repeated attempts to be understood, and your efforts to correct the story all keep the connection alive. From their point of view, any attention at all feeds their sense of importance. If something is kept alive by constant attention, the answer isn't more escalation. It's slowly reducing that attention. Think about a young child having a tantrum in public. The behavior continues because it gets a response. When adults react with panic, bargaining, or begging, the child learns that emotional chaos leads to power. Narcissistic individuals often carry a grown-up version of this into adulthood, polishing it over time. They get very good at triggering emotional responses like guilt, fear, anger, or defensiveness. Every reaction teaches them what works. Now, reducing your emotional engagement doesn't mean becoming cruel or turning into a cold, distant person. That would still be a kind of emotional involvement. What it really takes is steady behavior and restraint. You stop feeding the pattern without making a big announcement about it. Telling them you're done reacting is still a reaction. It just has a different costume on. Think of a slot machine. People keep playing not because it always pays out, but because it pays out once in a while. In the same way, inconsistent responses, sometimes engaging, sometimes pulling back, encourage repeated attempts. When your emotional reactions are reduced slowly and predictably, the behavior usually starts to lose energy. You need to know this doesn't shift overnight. At first, the behavior may get louder. Accusations might increase. Provocations might get sharper. Situations might suddenly feel more intense and dramatic. That doesn't mean the approach is failing. It often means the old pattern is resisting change. If you jump back in during this stage, the cycle starts all over again. That's why it helps not to keep announcing your boundaries or explaining your choices in long speeches. Instead, your responses become shorter, calmer, and more factual. Explanations get trimmed. Emotional justifications get smaller. The urge to be understood by someone who keeps twisting or ignoring your meaning is slowly released. This feels uncomfortable because a lot of people hold on to the fantasy that the perfect words at the perfect time will finally make the other person understand. That hope keeps the loop running. Change doesn't come from exposing someone or winning a debate. It comes from no longer giving them constant emotional fuel. When that fuel runs out, the other person is left to handle their own emotions and reactions. This way of dealing with things is not passive. It's deliberate. It takes awareness of your own emotional urges and the ability to pause before you act on them. It means you learn to sit with discomfort, like not correcting every lie or twist or not getting instant validation. That kind of restraint is not weakness. It's self-control. And self-control quietly changes power dynamics without a big fight. There's an interesting effect that sometimes shows up when you stop feeding the emotional pattern. The other person may suddenly act more attentive or more demanding, not because you're controlling them, but because the old familiar game is slipping away. Over time, if you stay consistent, you become less reactive and less emotionally tied to the pattern. When you reach that point, You're no longer trapped in the same cycle. That's the difference between just walking away from a situation and truly changing how you relate to it. You're not running. You're standing steady and choosing not to give more than you can afford emotionally. And that choice often changes everything. If you want to understand real power, you have to admit something most people don't want to face. The chaos around you often reflects chaos inside you more than you would like to admit. Narcissists are extremely good at spotting that inner instability. They sense it the way predators sense weakness, not because of anything magical, but because unregulated emotion broadcasts loudly. Becoming internally anchored means you stop handing your sense of reality to other people, especially to those who benefit from your confusion. It means your emotional state is no longer a weather vane spinning wildly in response to approval or rejection. And that is much harder than winning an argument, because arguments are loud and dramatic, while self-regulation is quiet, disciplined, and steady. Notice how easily your inner balance can get hijacked. 1. Dismissive text, a raised eyebrow, a subtle insult thrown at you in public, and suddenly your body tenses up. Your thoughts speed up. Your whole system gears up for a fight. Before you even know it, you're explaining yourself to someone who never planned to understand you. That's not random. That's conditioning. And if you don't interrupt it, it runs your life. An internally anchored person carries weight. Real psychological weight. Like a well-ballasted ship in a storm. The waves still hit hard, but the ship doesn't flip. Narcissists depend on knocking you off balance. They count on shaking you so they can control the story. When you don't lean, when you don't rush to defend, collapse, or attack back, something very unsettling happens for them. External calm does not mean you're numb. That misunderstanding hurts a lot of people. It means you feel everything, but you don't spill it everywhere. You don't let your nervous system grab the microphone. You respond on purpose, like a chess player who refuses to move a piece just because the other person slammed theirs on the board. Picture a workplace moment. A narcissistic manager criticizes you in front of others with a smirk, hoping you'll either shrink or explode. Most people choose one. They shut down or they snap. But imagine you keep your posture, hold eye contact, use a neutral tone, acknowledge the comment without emotional charge, and then keep going. No big self-defense speech. No visible rage. You've just cut off the whole tactic, and the room feels it, even if nobody says anything. This inner anchoring matters. Outer calm without inner order is just pushing feelings down. And pushing feelings down leaks out as sarcasm, passive-aggressive comments, or sudden blow-ups. Narcissists wait for those leaks, but when your direction comes from your values, your principles, your competence, and your commitment to truth, your calm becomes real, not fake. You become predictable in the best way, not boring, but solid. Like gravity. Other people start adjusting to you instead of you constantly adjusting to them, and the narcissist who feeds on emotional drama starts losing their grip. They push harder, poke sharper, because they can't find the handle anymore. Here's the twist most people don't want to accept. The more stable you are on the inside, the less you need to win. And the less you need to win, the more power you actually hold, because you're no longer betting your nervous system on every single interaction. You stop pouring your energy into fights that only exist to drain you. This takes practice, and it's uncomfortable because your body has learned automatic reactions. It wants to explain. It wants to correct. It wants to hit back. You have to say no to those urges over and over, not because you're weak, but because you're building something stronger than impulse. You're building character. When you're internally anchored and outwardly calm, you become hard to read. And that deeply bothers manipulative people because they can't map you anymore. They don't know which move creates which reaction. In that confusion, their control starts to fall apart. So here's your challenge. Stop letting other people set the temperature of your inner world. Build something solid inside yourself and carry it quietly into stressful moments. When you do that, the whole emotional dynamic shifts, not through force or domination, but through presence. There's a widespread myth about power that costs people their peace and their future. Many people think confrontation equals strength. They believe if you talk louder, sharper, and more aggressively, the truth will finally win. But narcissistic systems don't fall apart because you confronted them. They adjust to it, they feed on it, and they outlast anyone who relies only on confrontation. Consistency, on the other hand, is not flashy. And that's exactly why it works. It doesn't flood you with adrenaline or give you a big dramatic payoff, but it builds something far more formidable: credibility, predictability, and emotional gravity. And those traits quietly shift power dynamics without asking anyone for permission. Think about how most big confrontations really go. You rehearse a speech in your mind. You finally say the words you've been holding back. Maybe your voice shakes. Maybe it gets sharper. For a moment, you feel powerful, even justified. And then what? The narcissist dodges, denies, twists, provokes, or plays the victim. Suddenly, you don't feel strong at all. You're explaining yourself again, arguing about reality again, spending your energy again. Confrontation is a spark. Consistency is a climate. And people don't change because of a spark. They change because the environment stops rewarding the same old behavior. When you show up the same way every time, calm, clear, boundaried, factual, steady, without hostility, the emotional landscape starts to change. Picture someone who always tests limits. They show up late. They twist words. They push just enough to see if you'll react. Most people swing between extremes. One day they blow up. The next day they give in. That up and down reaction teaches the other person exactly how to work them. It's unintentional training. Now picture a different way. Every boundary crossing gets the same response. Not louder, not meaner, just the same. Consequences follow behavior with almost mechanical reliability. No long lectures, no big scenes, no emotional dump. Just cause and effect. Over time, the testing slows down, not because you crush them, but because the system stopped paying out for bad behavior. This is why consistency rattles narcissists, tick personalities. They rely on emotional ups and downs. They're always scanning for changes. Your fatigue, your guilt, your irritation, your weak spots, anything they can use. When your responses stop swinging, when your actions line up with your values, no matter what they throw at you, they lose their sense of direction. Think of yourself like a thermostat, not a flamethrower. A flamethrower gives instant heat, but it also burns everything down. A thermostat quietly sets the temperature over time. You don't argue with it. You don't scare it. You adjust to it. Consistency turns you into that emotional thermostat. Let's make it real. A family member subtly puts you down. If you fire back emotionally, they deny it, call you overly sensitive, or escalate the drama. But if every single time it happens, you respond with calm disengagement, shorter conversations, less access, and no big explanation, and you do this every time, something starts to shift. Not immediately, but over time. Consistency needs integrity, because you don't get to make exceptions just because you're tired, lonely, or hoping maybe this time will be different. That's where most people slip. They give up consistency for hope. And hope without structure is how these cycles stay alive. There's also a deeper moral side to consistency. You stop trying to control another person. You start controlling yourself. Your choices line up with your standards, whether anyone thanks you or not. That alignment creates self-respect, something no narcissist can invent for you or steal from you. Here's the hard truth. Confrontation feels like progress, but often it keeps you spinning in the same loop. Consistency feels slow and boring at first, but it builds trust, not just with others, but inside yourself. You become the kind of person who follows through, who does what they say, who doesn't need emotional fireworks to hold a boundary. Over time, people adjust. Some drift away because they can't manipulate you anymore. Others step up because the expectations are clear. And the narcissist who feeds on chaos and reaction finds themselves facing something they can't wear down or provoke. So here's the challenge. Stop waiting for the perfect big moment to confront. Stop rehearsing speeches that only feed the pattern. Decide who you are, how you act, and what you allow. Then live that decision consistently. When consistency replaces constant confrontation, power stops being a show and becomes real. There's a strong pull, especially after long periods of being blamed or undermined, to believe that justice means dramatic action, exposure, explanation, a final moment where you set the record straight. But that drive often keeps the chaos alive. Narcissistic instability doesn't need to be attacked. It needs to be revealed. And here's the twist. It usually shows itself only when you stop trying to manage it. When you stay emotionally still, you step out of the role of shock absorber. The force that used to be spread through you has nowhere to land. It turns inward. That's when cracks show up. Not because you created them, but because you stopped hiding them. Imagine a spinning top. As long as you keep giving it little pushes, it stays upright. You keep helping it, steadying it, fixing its wobble. As long as you do that, it stays spinning longer than it ever could on its own. Narcissistic personalities work the same way. They are unstable inside, but other people rush in to steady them with reassurance, fear, anger, and attention. The moment you step back and stop touching the top, the wobble is impossible to ignore. Staying still does not mean accepting abuse or staying where you're unsafe. That difference is crucial. It means you stop jumping in emotionally. You stop correcting, smoothing things over, explaining away, or covering for them. You let people feel the full weight of their choices without you cushioning the impact. Picture a social setting where someone is subtly aggressive, sarcastic, or domineering. If you call them out emotionally in front of everyone, they can frame you as overreacting. If you appease them, they gain more power. But when you respond briefly, calmly, and then step back, their behavior hangs in the air with no cover. And other people notice the mismatch. This is deeply uncomfortable at first because most well-meaning people are trained to fix tension, to make peace, to restore harmony. But harmony built on self-erasure is not harmony, it's submission. Staying still is how you refuse to take part in that quiet collapse. Narcissistic instability feeds on contrast. They need someone else to look louder, angrier, or more scattered so they can look calm and reasonable. When you take away that contrast, when you become slow, measured, and deliberate, their instability has nowhere to hide. You start seeing it clearly. Missed deadlines, emotional outbursts, contradictions, sudden dead, mood shifts. The same things you were once blamed for or dragged into now stand alone. And here's the key. You didn't expose them with a speech. You didn't accuse them. You simply stopped absorbing the blow. Staying still takes huge discipline because your nervous system wants to jump in. It wants to fix. It wants to argue. It wants to defend your name. But each time you resist that pull, you strengthen something deeper than reflex. You build the ability to handle not knowing how it will play out without falling apart. Think of it like standing on solid ground while someone else thrashes in deep water. If you jump in without thinking, you both go under. But if you hold your ground, calm, anchored, steady, their struggle becomes obvious. Sometimes the only way someone sees their own instability is when they no longer have you to lean on. This isn't about feeling superior. It's about truth. Instability cannot stay hidden forever when it's no longer mirrored, softened, or managed by other people. Staying still is an act of respect for reality. You let things be what they are, not what you hope they'll turn into. There's also a moral layer here that most people miss. When you constantly step in, you rob others of the chance to face themselves. You become a quiet partner in the distortion. Staying still is your way of refusing to carry someone else's lie. And here's the unexpected result. When you stop reacting, stop rescuing, stop holding everything together, people start to trust your presence more. You are no longer volatile. You're not putting on a show. You're not pulled into every storm. You become a reference point, and instability stands out sharply next to your steadiness. So here's the challenge in front of you. Don't move just to ease your discomfort. Don't rush in to manage other people's chaos. Build enough strength inside yourself to stay present with thoughts stepping in. Because when you do that, reality does the talking. And instability, no matter how well it's covered, eventually shows itself. What you've seen here is not a trick, and it's definitely not a performance. It's a discipline. You stop feeding chaos. You anchor yourself on the inside. You trade emotional fireworks for consistency. And then, this is the hardest part. You stay still long enough for reality to speak without your help. That is courage. That is you refusing to lie for someone else's instability. When you do that, power shifts quietly, not because you beat someone, but because you stopped holding up something that was already falling apart. And here's the question I want you to sit with honestly and uncomfortably, without rushing to escape it. Where in your life are you still moving, explaining, reacting, or rescuing? Not because it's right, but because you're scared of what might show up if you stood still. Sit with that, because the answer will show you exactly where your growth is being delayed. If this hit a nerve, stay here. Subscribe. This space is about learning how to stand firm when life gets hard. Share this with someone who's been carrying chaos that was never theirs to carry. And tell me in the comments what changed the moment you stopped reacting and let reality speak for itself.